guys, I'm Katie Roome from paranormalpress.com, where I review indie sci-fi and fantasy books. Welcome to the reading room. Chapter 1. There was no good reason for the company to be out logging this remote stretch of woods, but Lance wasn't paid to think. He was paid to cut. Lost Hills Logging wasn't just the biggest outfit in the region, it was the best. Lance took pride in being on the team, even though today he'd much rather be in Sadler City with his wife and daughter. In any case, the faster he finished, the faster he could get out of here and back to them. Currently, he was attacking a tree atop a tricky slope the feller buncher couldn't quite manage. Rope secured and crampons dug into the bark of the 90-foot pine, Lance let his chainsaw bite into the nearest branch, chewed through it like butter, and watched hundreds of pounds of wood fall to the forest floor with a boom. The woods were a racket of power tools, digging and hauling machinery, roughnecks hollering and laughing. It had to be the most action this forest had ever seen. Lance was about to scoot himself down to the next set of branches when there was a bright flash of light to the north. Someone cursed in surprise, and several shouts of warning rose from among the hills. A still moment passed, Lost Hill loggers trying to imagine what it was they'd just seen. Then another, brighter, longer flash, accompanied by a rapid series of deafening pops, and one final crack as something unfathomably huge and hard gave way. Hundreds of old-growth trees and tons of rock and dirt rocketed skywards. Lance could hear the screams of lumberjacks as they were tossed helplessly by the eruption. As the debris fell, and men bellowed for order and a plan, a bruised light painted the ruined clearing and nearby trees crimson and green. The light grew, reaching in nebulous tentacles above and among the trees. Lance had no idea what the blood light was, but his soul screamed that it couldn't be good. He touched the lump of his cross beneath red flannel and prayed for protection from he knew not what, then started descending his tree on the edge of panic. Just before his boots touched ground, the screams started. It was a sound unlike anything Lance had ever heard. Horrid and sharp and desperate, like the wails of undead babies racked with hunger pangs. Shouts of warning and panic joined the chorus of terror. A truck started up and boots pounded the ground, fleeing something. Lance raced to get his climbing gear off. He'd put down his chainsaw and was about to run towards the sounds of trouble. He looked at the tool, squinted, and picked it up again, then ran. He passed Marco along the way. The burly Latino's eyes were wide and dark. Sweat poured down his face. "Where are you going? We have to get out of here!" Marco screamed. He didn't wait for an answer and rushed away from the trouble. Lance thought Marco might be right, but he couldn't flee without answering the screams for help. It didn't matter what the cost might be. The sickly light grew more present, if not brighter, as he came near to the site of the eruption. The trees ahead were broken askew. Beyond the tree line, a crater filled with gangrenous light. In the shadows, crooked forms slunk to and fro as if in confusion. Suddenly, Lance realized the chorus of screams had ceased. An old pickup truck was parked just off the road they'd forged to the logging site. Lance hid behind it and observed. A human form struggled to pull itself out of the crater, and succeeded, resting on hands and knees in the shadowed grass, breathing hard. It looked to Lance like Jerry, a grizzled veteran of the forest who'd lost a few fingers on the job, but kept at it nonetheless. Jerry seemed to notice something behind him and scrambled to his feet, but when he tried to run, a scythe of shining blood lashed out from the pit and took his feet off at the ankles. Lance gasped and stood. He wanted to help but was paralyzed. If the light were alive, he did not think that his chainsaw would work against it. Jerry fell, screaming, clutching at the stumps of his legs as the luminous blood merged with his own. The bright crimson liquid was flowing into him. Jerry's veins lit up, then faded to black, and even at a distance Lance could see his skin gaining a green pallor. The blood light reached Jerry's eyes and replaced their cool blue with a deep red that shone like hate through the shadows. Lance took a step back. Something screeched and tore at his flannel shirt. Lance spun to find a man named Kyle before him, red eyes blazing with mindless evil. Instinct brought the chainsaw around and into the side of Kyle's head. The resistance of contact was more like hitting tree bark than a human skull, and though it cut Kyle's sickly skin, the static blade did not penetrate bone. It just hadn't been a good enough swing. Kyle's hands clamped down on the saw blade. The skin of his fingers had been worn to the bone, and what was left looked sharp as knives. Lance frantically tried to start the chainsaw motor. It choked. Kyle sliced through one of his sleeves, drawing blood. Lance gritted his teeth. He planted a foot in Kyle's chest, driving him away, but the other's grip was stronger, and the chainsaw went with him. "Get your own saw," Lance spat, as he vaulted up into the pickup truck's bed. There were tools here, a hammer, coils of rope, a machete, but Lance's eyes fell on a gas-powered pole saw. He lunged for it as Kyle scrambled up into the truck with him. His old co-worker apparently lacked the presence of mind now to retain a weapon. He brandished his bone claws instead. Lance stumbled as Kyle's weight shook the truck on its shocks. Lance twisted to keep balance, and one hand landed on the shaft of the pole saw. The other slapped cold metal near the machete. He grabbed it. Lance swept up with a rising cut and caught Kyle in the jaw. The beast inside the once man screamed even as the machete ruined his monstrous face. Barely keeping balance, Lance jumped the tailgate, braced himself, dropped the machete, and pulled the cord to start the pole saw. Still warmed up, it started on the first pull, and Lance grinned. Kyle's jaw was falling off, but the monster came on. It vaulted to the ground with somewhat less grace than Lance, and was met with the growling saw chain. Lance carved a hole in once Kyle's chest, and only let himself breathe when the body fell aside limp. Lance expected the corpse to leak luminescent blood, like that in the nearby crater, but it bled like any body, and the light of wickedness faded from its eyes. Was it Kyle again? Either way, it was dead. Lance had let his guard down out of relief when something growled to his right. He turned. Jerry approached, but slowly, stumbling on the ruined stumps of his ankles. He showed no reaction to what must have been excruciating pain. If Lance had any doubts about the humanity of these once beings before, it was now entirely dispelled. Lance one-handed the pole saw and retrieved the machete. Might as well save the power tool if it was possible. Lance closed the distance to Jerry, casting his eyes to the sides to check for flanking monsters. They seemed to be alone, though Lance was certain other men would have been altered during or after the blood eruption. Lance feinted a strike with the machete, testing his enemy's reflexes. They were good, but Jerry still fell for the trick. He moved to block in one direction as Lance switched it up, and brought the machete across Jerry's exposed neck. He didn't quite behead the once man, but it was more than enough to take him out. Jerry fell to the ground, dead, again. Lance allowed himself a quick debate. What was in the blood pit that had caused this? How close could he get without being altered himself? Was it worth the risk to know? He decided it was. He jogged closer to the crater, sweating like a pig. There was a thankful rise, the merest swell of a hill, which gave him a better angle into the pit. It was hard to see through the swirling blood light, but he thought there was indeed an anomaly down there, a formation of absinthe-hued gemstone, dusted with dirt and rock, blasted from the eruption of power. It occurred to Lance very briefly that this might be what Lost Hills logging had been after, them or their clients. But there wasn't time to tease out a conspiracy. He needed to flee before the situation here got worse, and he didn't want to have to kill more of his former colleagues. Jogging back to the rusty old truck, Lance checked the ignition on a whim. The keys were in and it started. He threw the pole saw in the bed, but kept the machete close at hand. Whatever else was in the truck's storage chest was his now. Soon Lance was bouncing down the rough road, eager to leave the cursed forest behind. If this sounded interesting to you, I encourage you to check out Bloodbane, Quest of Lance by TJ Marquis. If you'd like to know more about it, I did a long-form positive review on my website, paranormalpress.com. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Katie Roome from paranormalpress.com, where I review indie sci-fi and fantasy books. This has been The Reading Room. Thank you for joining me.